Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Dynamics 365 Accelerate for Customization and Configuration exam preparation. Today we are continuing with session number 4. As in with previous sessions, you'll be asked to interact throughout the session using the group chat. I'd like to ask you to please post a smiling face in the chat window now to indicate that the audio is working and that we know that you're ready to proceed. Thank you much. If you experience any difficulties during the event, please let me know via chat and I'll contact you one-on-one in order to assist you to solve your problem. As always, it is very important that you remember to keep your microphone muted during today's session to make sure there are no disturbances. To raise any questions, please use the group chat or audio line. And now, without any further delay, I would like to hand over the microphone to your presenter, Ulrich Carlson. Ulrich, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And let's go ahead and share our slide deck. And thanks everybody for attending again here to our 4th session on customization and configuration. And of course, we'll be continuing actually where we left off on the last session where we looked at solutions, entities, and field customizations. We'll look at some more detailed field customizations today, as well as working with relationships, which is kind of a part of field customization too, as lookup fields, for example, do relate to a relationship specifically, for example. But first up, let's have a quick review of the session from a couple of days ago here, where we looked at the different solutions and what solution management actually is and how you can use solutions to basically have a container of components that you can use to create, package, deploy, and maintain your different customizations into different Dynamics 365 environments. So these different solutions contain references to the components are not necessarily the components themselves, they're all inside the system. And we also looked at the life cycle of different types of solutions, the different types being managed and unmanaged. And of course, a solution would only become managed if it is exported as a managed solution. You cannot create a managed solution from scratch. All solutions starts off as unmanaged, and then you export them, and in that process you can make them manage. And of course, making sure that you have all the correct components included in solution is important, because you will not be able to import solutions into an environment where you don't have all the required components. So if there's something missing, you won't be able to import it. It must be already included in the target environment or included in the solution itself. Now we'll look at creating custom entities. And that's one of the areas where you can kind of really start to shape how you want Dynamics 365 to look and meet requirements that the out-of-the-box functionality doesn't provide. And all of those entities have a number of properties that we basically a lot of checkboxes that you can check off, like mail merge, email enabled, support queues, etc. That's on there. And keep in mind, some of those can be turned on and off, and some of those can only be turned on. If you turn them on, they cannot be turned off. So you want to make sure that you are absolutely sure that you want to turn those items off. I gave you the example of the enable an entity for email. Be 100% sure that you actually want to enable an entity for email, because you cannot turn it off and it might be very confusing. And if that happens, there's absolutely no way that you can take it back afterwards outside of recreating the whole custom entity. And finally, we looked at adding some custom fields to an entity that allow you to, or allow the users to input data, populate data as needed. And we looked at the different fields types and what you could do with those. For this session, though, we'll be looking at more field customizations. Last session, we looked at some pretty standard field customization. Now we'll be looking at more advanced field customizations, of what the options are around those. And then finally, we'll look at relationships and managing relationships between entities and the different types of relationships that are available in Dynamics 365. So let's look at those additional field customizations and see what we can do to those. And we'll be looking at what the different field types are and how they meet specific client needs. We'll look at using calculated and roll-up fields and specifically what those are. And we'll talk about option sets and what the difference is between local and global option sets. And definitely on the more advanced area, we'll look at using alternate keys to facilitate data integration. which is one of the newer areas to Dynamics 365, the ability to have an alternate key to keep data consistent and have data integrity when you are integrating with another system. Finally, we'll look at the field level security and how that works and how that's actually an additional security role that can be used. And we also we'll look at the state and status reasons transitions that we can control and have some options for managing. So using the different fields to meet client needs. So often we'll be looking at what the customer's needs are. If they need to perform calculations, if they need to aggregate data from related records, if you want to prevent specific users from viewing and modifying specific data, if you want to share lists across entities. Those are some of the discussions that you'll have with your customers and your organization about what you actually need from those different fields. And as you can tell here, the examples here list some of the standard field types. The first one then being calculated fields. And calculated fields will let you automate manual calculations. So it's basically picking up information from other fields that's available on the entity or related entity. And there's an expression support available that'll help you create the formulas. And you can also add conditions and filters to when you want to use those calculated fields. So you, for example, can create a rated revenue, which basically would be the estimated revenue times the probability. The probability is usually set as a percentage of how likely an opportunity is to close. So the rated revenue would be the estimated revenue times the percentage that likely to close. So if it's $100,000 and you are 80% sure that it's going to close, then the weighted revenue is $80,000. You could also be calculating like the cost of labor or net worth based on all the task activities, all the information that's been put into the system, and calculate information on that. And all the calculation on the calculated fields will basically update immediately when any updates are made to the fields that are relevant to the information, or relevant to the calculation. When you create a calculated field, you have to change the field type, and you have to do this when you create the fields. You can't go back and change the field later after you created it and say, oh, we had a whole number field here, I would rather have it be a calculated field. You can't do that. This has to be done on create. And so you have to make sure you change the field type from simple to calculated on create. And the moment you click edit, it'll actually create the field. Usually you have to put in all the information and save the field before it actually saves. But when you create a calculated field, it'll save when you click that edit button. So just be aware of that, because you want to double check your spelling on the schema name and everything prior to creating the field. So the save there is going to come a little prematurely. So make sure you have everything in order before you click edit. Because of course, once you create it, you cannot change the schema name and you cannot change the field type afterwards. And as I mentioned, you can only define that during the field creation. However, you can come back and change the calculation at any time. So the calculation expressions, basically come back in and click edit at any time and make changes to whatever is being calculated on there. So you don't have to make sure that your calculation is correct in the first go. You do have an option to go back and forth and test things out. Roll-up fields, on the other hand, roll-up fields are it's an aggregate value of the records, basically the child records on the entity. So for an account, for example, that has a lot of contacts, then the roll-up fields could be pointing to the contact child entity and be basically rolling up information from all those contacts. So that could be as simple as summing up from a value field on all of those contacts. It could be a count of all the contacts, minimum, maximum, average values. So if you have transactional records, for example, or you have looking at an opportunity and you have a lot of products associated with that opportunity, you can of course have the sum, you can have the count, Minimum would be the cheapest product, maximum would be the most expensive product, and the average would be the average price of all the products in there. That you can create as separate fields on the opportunity entity based on the opportunity products that's associated with that, that individual record. So just a note on roll-up fields, as opposed to calculated fields. Roll-up fields do not calculate automatically all the time like calculated fields do. Roll-up fields will roll up once an hour or on demand. So keep that in mind that if you're looking at a record with roll-up fields, it may not be the latest possible item, latest possible calculation that you're looking at, but you have the opportunity to update the calculation manually, as well as you can have workflows that force that calculation at the appropriate times. Then we have Dynamics 365 option sets. And option sets is one of those things that has many names. It's also called pick lists or drop-down lists. I tend to call them option sets just because that's what they're called inside Dynamics 365, but drop-downs and pick lists are also used quite commonly. Option sets always stores the values as integers, so it's always a number that you're looking at. But it doesn't display those on the forms, it displays the text label that's associated with the different values. So that means you can also have localized languages, for example, and different languages for the different values on the option set. So you can customize both the options, the integers, as well as the labels as needed. For the option sets, there are two different types of option sets. There's a local option set and a global option set. The term local option set, that is used when you create an option set that belongs to a single field on a single entity, and that is the only place that you can use that option set. You can't use it anywhere else. A global option set is something that you create as a component by itself, and then you can use that on multiple fields throughout all of Dynamics 365 on different entities, on different fields as required. That also means that you have a lot of advantages using the global option set, because you're ever thinking that you might actually want to use an option set in multiple places, then definitely go for a global option set. It may even, so even if you're unsure, I would say create a global option set. As a personal preference, I like to create all option sets as global option sets and then use them on the field, even if I think I'm only going to use it one time, because you never really know what's going to happen in the future, and you may require to use a global option set instead, and then you have the option to basically use another entity. There's no particular disadvantage to using a local option set aside from it saving, a few clicks when you are setting it up, and it might be a little easier to overview. So consider those advantages, drawbacks before you create a new option set. When we look at option sets and field mapping, and this is why the global option sets are nice. So when you map option set between different entities, it's going to match on the underlying integer values, for example. So you want to make sure that all the option sets have equivalent labels. So in the example here, if we have an entity of field and one entity called event type, that's a local option set. The integer values are 1, 2, 3, 4. They're called product demo, market research, product launch, and trade show. Then we map that on to booking type, where there's a similar option set and it's supposed to have the same value. However, the order is mixed. We don't have the fourth value. It can't really map it properly. So if we map some values from event type to booking type and the integer was value 2, that market research would suddenly be product launch, and it wouldn't be appropriate. So you can run into a lot of issues that way. Of course, you could also use it to your advantage if you did need to map option sets between different entities and you wanted specific values to have one name on one entity and a different name on the other after we went through that mapping. So I haven't seen that happen, but theoretically you could use that feature to your advantage instead. I haven't seen that on entities. I've used it in dialogues, for example, where you can prompt users different options, and then basically based on the integer you can set the value of the option set, which is a more specific, much more specific situation than actually mapping between entities. So in general, rule of thumb, and in my personal opinion, I would always create a global option set instead. So if you want to modify option sets, you can create new labels for new and existing records. And if you delete options, so if you create new labels, that basically means that all the existing records will get that new label. So in the previous example where we had one of the options was product launch, if we change that to just call it launch, then all the records that have that specific value would now say launch instead of product launch, because you changed the label, not the integer. The integer is what's being stored in the database. The label is just what's being shown. If you delete options from your option sets, all the old records that has that value will still have the old value. So that can be a little problematic when it's trying to show the data and you actually don't have the information. So all the old records will then be updated to the current default value when the record is opened, but not until it's opened. So what is definitely recommended is that you use advanced find to essentially look up all the old values that you're going to take out and replace them with something else prior to you making changes to the global option set. You can clear it out and basically have a clean slate to work with. So with all those options, list everything. You can also create a lookup to a custom entity instead, as opposed to using an option set, which is also a possibility. But that's only if you have a lot of options or a very long list where option sets might not be suitable. So what that actually means is that you, instead of creating an option set, you create a lookup to a custom entity that we would call it options, an options entity. And in the lookup field, you can basically filter according to other records or other options on the record. You can filter the records that will be available, and that will basically be put in as an option and kind of emulate an option set via a lookup to a custom entity. All right. Alternate keys, as I mentioned, is definitely I'm on the advanced side. Alternate keys helps you integrate external data into Dynamics 365. And what alternate keys do is that they basically help you create a unique record. And it's enforced that the alternate key has to be unique. So if you have an external system that doesn't store the ID that's generated in Dynamics 365, you can use the external ID and basically create a field and assign that as the alternate key, and make sure that on integration you populate the alternate key with that external ID. And Dynamics 365 will help ensure that it is unique. You can also, instead of having one field as an alternate key, you can actually also specify multiple fields as the alternate key. So it doesn't have to be one key, it could also be a combination of keys. So in the example here where we have the account name, the selected attributes are account name and account number, the combination of those two is the alternate key. So the combination of name and account number always have to be unique. You could possibly have multiple accounts with the same name and multiple accounts with the same account number, but if you have a combination where the account name and the account number is the same for two different records, then the alternate key will come in and say, this is not possible, you cannot create this record. So it's definitely more enforced than the duplicate check features, for example. All right, so actually let's go investigate the alternate keys there and where we create those settings. I'll go ahead and share my desktop. And I'll go ahead and find my solution, and actually I'll go to opportunities here. And open up the solution manager. And basically say customize entity. And just a note here, when I approach editing opportunities this way, I'm not doing it through the solution. Had I gone to solutions, open up a custom solution of an entity and just had my few components, I would just be working on that individual solution. I can also come this way, but when I do this, notice I'm working directly in the default solution. Generally, I wouldn't necessarily be recommending that. I always recommend doing it through the solutions themselves, so you have better control. You're making sure that you're including all your changes in the correct solution. So I'm just deviating a little here from best practice, but sometimes it is nice if you just don't want to make changes, but just want to go in and review stuff and look at the settings. Then that's definitely a nice little shortcut to come in here and look at the configurations and the solutions. All right, so we'll see here no keys are available for the opportunity, so we can go ahead and create some by clicking the new button there. And I'll need to create a display name. Let's call this external ID. And notice it'll say new over here instead of UBC like the ones I created yesterday. That is because I'm in the default solution, and that one has the new prefix associated with it. So I can basically come in here and say I want to say step name, close probability, and topic has to be unique, otherwise it won't bring. Now I could also just say step name and topic, for example. None of these really make any sense, but I have options to include those. So let's go ahead and say OK, and now I'll actually start creating the key, and it might actually have some problems there because one of the columns is way too long. So instead of the pipeline phase, maybe we can just do the topic. All right, there we go. And now we'll create that key, and we can use that when it comes to integration. So one thing I want to highlight on the keys there, for example, is that you can only have one alternate, you can create multiple alternate keys per entity. So if I wanted to go ahead here and create another one, I can go and ahead and do that. And the alternate keys are enforced when I try and create new records. So in a second here, I'll actually go ahead and create something about the new items there. So here I could basically select something else, create additional key, and then essentially I would have two alternate keys for that specific record. So let me go ahead and try. And so what's the use of having multiple alternate keys? That's a good question. The main purpose is basically if you're integrating with multiple systems, you can have multiple different keys for it. Or if you need to, that is basically the only one that I've seen. However, it is rare that I see the need for multiple keys, but it is an option to have them in there. So I'll just try and create one here called printers. And now it's telling me that it's a duplicate record. The entity key external ID requires as a set of attributes, blah, blah, blah. So basically the alternate key comes in here and blocks it because I'm now trying to create an opportunity with the same name as another opportunity already has on the same topic, which I define as the alternate key. So it's forced as being unique both here and on import. All right. There's a question here. Would they work as an AND condition or OR condition when created multiple keys? They work independently of each other, so they both have to be unique. So if I created another key here, if on another field, topic 2, for example, then topic the first topic had to be unique, and the other field that I created as a key would have to be unique. So it kind of be an and condition. It's not one of them have to be unique. They both have to be unique. All right, so moving on a little bit from creating all the different fields and keys but staying in the field area is field security. And field security is a part of the different access methods and allows you to give access to information. And it applies to all the different ways that you can access information about fields. So that includes the different views, the charts, audit logs, data import, of course exporting to Excel, and using the SDK. So let's go see, what if we have duplicate records before creating alternate keys? That is actually a good question. I'm not entirely sure what happens in that situation. You might get an error somewhere along the way or get a default. I'll actually have to get back to you on that. That is a good question. So I'll have the answer for you here on the next our next session. For the field security, that is available for all system and custom fields, so you can pretty much apply it to anything. And when you add field security, then all access is removed for all users except the system administrator until you allow them to have access to it. And you can create those field security profiles both for users and for teams. So just by assigning someone to a team, they would automatically adopt those security roles, security privileges, and get access to the fields that you have. Of course, in the system administrator profile, they automatically get full permissions to all fields. So all users that have the system admin security role just automatically have access to all of those fields. And notice here the fields that have been secured have that little key icon on them, means that they have field security enabled for them. So the field security profiles, so when you go in and look at those field permissions and the field security profiles, all secure fields are listed. And you can add different users or teams and basically grant them permissions on a per field basis. And there are 3 different permissions to work with that you can allow: read, update, and create. And they're independent of each other. So read basically means you can read whatever is in the field. Update means that you can make changes to it. And create means that you can, if the field is empty, you can add information to it. So, and since they're independent of each other, you can, for example, have create but not read. I'll give you a sample size. So if you take up somebody's credit card information, a social security number, confidential information, and you're on the phone with the customer and you sit there and type it in, and you verify that it's correct, and then you save the record, and then you can't read it any longer because it's gone. You don't want people to be able to go back and look up confidential information later on, but they need to be able to write it down and get it into the system. So you can give somebody create permissions but not read permissions, for example. Update permissions, of course, does mean that you could have updates, so you can basically overwrite it, but you have no idea what you're overwriting, for example. And that security, field security and security roles are separate. So keep that in mind, that if you create field security roles and start using field security, you also have to add the field security roles to the users and teams, and not just the security roles themselves. So the standard security applies at the entity level. That's all managed through security roles. And the record level, that's enabled by sharing specific records. And the field is controlled by using the field security profiles. So if you have a combination of field security profiles and security roles, then the least restrictive field security profile applies. and the least restrictive security role applies. And the most restrictive of the two models win. All right. So the example here, if one user has update access to a specific record and read permissions to a secure field, that means that they can only read the field, even though they have update access to the record. So field security profiles basically always wins over the security role, assuming that the person already has access to the record itself or the entity itself. So think of it as another way, and how I usually like to describe it. So security roles defines whether or not you have access to the entity or the record itself. Field security profiles defines your access to the individual fields if field security has been applied to it. So field security only applies to records you already have access to. If you don't have access to the records of the entity, field security roles doesn't matter because they're not going to be applied. But if you do have access to the records, then the field security profiles will apply if there are any fields with field security on them. All right, let's have a look at that in context. All right, so I'll actually go ahead here and go to Settings and Solutions. And sorry, can people still hear me? So, all right, good. All right, so I'll go ahead and pick up the custom solution we worked here with the other day, and look at the account entity and look at the different fields that we have on here. And we're going to apply. So I actually only added one field here, address, one city. So I actually come in here and apply field security to it, basically just by enabling field security on here. So I'll go ahead and save and close. That's all I have to do on the field is enable, click enable on this field. If I had multiple fields on here, and let me actually just see if I have more on contact. There we go, we have a lot on contact. I could actually select multiples and click on edit. It was right there, it wasn't hidden. And change the field requirement. Oh, I may have actually chosen some fields that were not enabled for field security. All right, I guess I can do this. I wanted to show you guys how to bulk edit it, but you can't do that. Apparently, you have to do that one by one now. And basically open up the fields individually and check off the field security box. All right, there we go. So once I've done that, I can come back here and go to Settings and go to the security right there and go to field security profiles. And look at the different profiles I have available here. So notice since I have the field service solutions, I already have some different roles involved. I'll go ahead and create a new item. Let's see here, I can try and zoom in a little bit. There we go. And put in a name here, we'll just put in demo field security. Let's click Save. And now I can associate the different teams and users I actually want involved for this. So I'll go ahead here and I can add some different users. I only have one user here in the system, so I'll just select myself. Even though I don't really need to because I'm already a system admin, but that's fine. So I'll get this field secure role, and then I can choose field permissions. Here, I just need to make the screen a little bit bigger. And in here, I get all the different fields that have that I enable for field security. And that's actually 103 fields already enabled for field security. And that's because I have the project service and field service items installed. So a lot of fields here on the work order service, total cost, total amount, a lot of those fields are applied with field service security. And notice all of these are by default just going to say no, so I'm not going to have any access to them at all. But I can come in here and basically edit all these items individually. And in this case, I can select multiple and change the allow read, allow update, allow create. Say yes, we can read this. Yes, we can update them. Actually, no, we cannot update them, but we can create new ones, for example. I'm going to say OK there. And now we've updated the security profile. So basically, keep in mind that you basically have to add both security roles and field security profiles to the user when you work with field security, if they need to have access to some of those fields. They are managed separately. You cannot automatically make a field security profile part of a security role. Unfortunately, it would be nice if some of those maybe went hand in hand, but those have to be done separately. Another thing I want to highlight here is that if you do use the auditing feature and you do audit fields that have field security enabled on them, that means you have to have read access to that field in order to be able to see anything in the auditing log. It's not just going to remove that field. It's going to remove the entire auditing log for you. So if you're auditing on account, for example, and you audit all the different fields on account, and some of those some users cannot read, and they want to go look at the audit log and they want to see what changed in the account, all the information that's been going on there, then they won't have access to it because they don't have read access to the fields that have field level security on them. So keep that in mind, and you're going to rule out the options to be, for some people, to look at the audit log if you include field security on fields that you're also auditing. And that's usually likely because if you put field security on a field, it's probably an important field. You want to know. You want to know what happened with it specifically. All right. So let's get back to the slide deck here and move on from the fields a little bit. And talk a little bit about the status and status reason, also sometimes called the state code. Status is basically active or inactive. Those are the two main states that any or most records are in. There's a couple of system entities that have more, like case, for example, or opportunity. So case have open, canceled, and completed, or resolved. So basically giving it 3 states instead of the standard 2. You cannot customize the state of a record. All custom entities will have active and inactive and nothing else. Can't make any changes to that. What you can make changes to, though, is the status reason. And that's the one that provides detail on the active state, or the deactivated state that a record is in. So that's basically the reason why the record is in that specific state. So for example, a case record that is in the state canceled, which is an inactive state with canceled, the status reason could be it was merged, or it was a duplicate record, or whatever other status reason you could put in there, but that's the reason why it's canceled. And you can rename those and use new ones, but by default, when you create a new custom entity, the status reasons are also called active and inactive, but you can make changes to those, as well as changing the labels and adding more options as needed. Then you can also manage the status reason transitions, meaning that on the case, custom entities, other records, those status transitions can be controlled. So you can specify to which different status you can go into. So if a record is in a specific status, then you only have a certain set of options of where you want to go. Basically meaning if you are putting a case in the status service escalated, you can say, well, from service escalated, the only possible options to change the status is cancel, merge, solve, and info given. You cannot escalate it from there because it's already escalated. So that's not a viable option for status. If the status for case, for example, is researching, then you can put it in progress, on hold, merge, cancel, solve, all these other items. As well as it's in progress, you can put it on hold, you can make it solve, cancel. So you can control what the different options are. So you can actually have a progression of the different status reasons and control that everything follows a natural flow of those different status transitions. All right, so let's look a little bit at the relationships and get a good overview of different relationships and the one-to-many and many-to-many relationships in Dynamics 365, and we'll look at working with hierarchical data as well as using the entity mapping. We talked a little bit about entity mapping earlier when we were talking about the option sets and having to map local option sets manually instead of using a global one. But we can use the entity mapping to also pre-populate data. For example, populating address fields when you create a new contact from an account. You can automatically add all those address fields to the contact. And then finally, we'll also look at connection and connection roles. So first up, one-to-many relationships. And the one record is the primary entity. And then you can have 0, 1, or many other records of a related entity or a child entity, if you will. So for example here, a one-to-many could be account to contacts. Meaning one account could have none, one, or multiple contacts associated with it. And of course, on the contact, there's going to be a lookup field that identifies the parent customer or the specific account of that parent record. A many-to-one relationship is basically the reverse of that relationship. So you can able to see that in the solution manager. Then there's another type of relationship that you can create in Dynamics 365, and that's a many-to-many relationship, sometimes just described as NN. It's a symmetrical relationship. That means you have a hidden table that you cannot really get access to inside Dynamics 365 with the user interface. You have to use code or the SDK or something else in order to get access to that intersect entity, but it is there, and it defines the relationship between different entities. The only there's only a very few many-to-many system relationships in Dynamics 365, and one of them is, for example, opportunity to competitor. That means you can associate many competitors to many opportunities, basically. Many-to-many relationship does have some constraints when it comes to, for example, charting and analytics and getting data from the relationship, because it can be difficult to see, get an overview of how many opportunities the different competitors are associated with. You can always go into the individual competitor and look how many they're associated with, but it's difficult to create an Excel template or something else that tells you information because you don't have access to the intersect table, for example. There's some ways around that. You can use chart XML and chart modifications in order to do that, but it makes it a little more complex. So there, of course, the option is that you create an intersect entity yourself and define that relationship if you need the additional analytics from the information on there. On the one-to-many relationships, which of course the reverse one is many-to-one, that's all identified under the Solution Explorer under both of the entities. So you can look it in there, you can look up the metadata, and technically you only have the one-to-many relationship exists in the metadata. That's the only one you have access to. When you click on the other one, many-to-one, that's basically just a shortcut to the relationship pointing from the other side. So, and that basically means that each of those, the item here where we have a venue is a primary, and event is related in one-to-many. So basically it means that one venue can have many events. And the event entity will have the lookup field to the venue entity. So basically similar to my example as the account and contact item. So if you look at this on a form, we create a new one-to-many relationship. We can basically specify the details that's going there, including like what is the new lookup field going to be called, what's going to be the specific schema name of the relationship, and put in any of the specific requirements that's needed. Is this going to be optional? Do you want to display this in the navigation menu, for example? What you also specify in here is all the actions and the relationship behavior that happens when you do something with these records. And if you want any of those actions to cascade down to all the child records. And that can actually, this is definitely something that you should review, because this is very important on how the system works and whether or not it do perform the actions that you intend. So the different options there, because there's a number of options. Notice that we have assign, share, unshare, roll-up view, etc. So we'll actually go ahead and look at those different items and what those actions triggers. And so when I assign, let's say that all of these applies to our account to contact relationship, for example. So if I take an account and I assign that to another user, so there's a salesperson responsible, I assign it to another salesperson who's now going to be responsible for that account. Then, and we have cascading assign, that means that all of the contacts associated to that account will be assigned to the new owner of the account record. The same if I share the account record to somebody who does not have access to it. That means all the contacts will now also be shared with that new owner. Sorry, will also be shared with the person whom the account was shared with. The same thing goes for unshare. So if you reparent something, it basically means a related entity record is associated to a primary entity record or reassociated to a different one. So if you basically reparent and the related record, then all of the other ones are going to be reassociated as well. If you merge two records, then you can also do a cascading merge, meaning that some of the child records will also be affected, and the contact you merge two accounts, the contacts that belongs to the account that you're merging will be transferred into the new merged account. And the most important one is the delete. So if you delete the account, you're also going to delete all the contacts that are in there. So keep in mind, make sure you adjust those cascading relationship. A lot of them, a common one that I usually turn off that's enabled is on cases, for example, specifically in customer service scenarios, because cases to activities, for example, always have the cascading relationship enabled. On cases, it's very common to create tasks, appointments, etc., other activities that other people, not the case owner, are supposed to perform. So if you reassign the case, that actually means that means all the open activities, everything that you line up that other people are supposed to be working on will actually be reassigned in the same process as when you're reassigning the case itself. All right, so there's some more options on the cascading items, because you have granularity on how much of it you want to, how many of the record you actually want to cascade. So I actually got a question here for reparent. If I assign an account to someone else in a different business unit, does it mean that the person in the new business unit sees all the related records previously created by people in a different unit, or do you need to share? So if you assign an account to someone else in a different business unit and it's cascading, that means all the contacts, everything will be let me just make sure I got the question right. Yeah, so if you have, if you assign an account to someone else, all right, so if you had a task created by the original owner and assign the account to someone else, will the task, will they see the task, or do I have to share? So they will be able to see the task in that scenario, and you wouldn't have to share it separately. So yes, that does give them the right. So, and there's some cascading options on that. So with the Cascade All, Cascade Active, Cascade User, and Cascade None are your settings for when this wants, when this is supposed to, or how this is supposed to work. So Cascade All is pretty simple. Anything that's available will get reassigned if it's unassigned, for example. Cascade Active means that it will only assign the open items. Specifically for case to activities, that's a problem because you definitely don't want to reassign tasks from one person to another. So anything that's active. So Cascade User Owned means that you're only cascading items that's owned by the same user as the owner of the primary entity or the primary record. So if you have a case, for example, that's owned by me and I own a couple of tasks, and then I have other tasks assigned to other people, and I assign the case to somebody else, then the tasks that I owned will get reassigned to the new case owner, but all the tasks that were assigned to other groups or teams will remain assigned to those people who were to whom they were assigned. On the other hand, Cascade None, for example, makes no changes to the records when any of these actions happen. And that was specific to assign, share, and reparent. Cascade Delete is a little bit different because you can either do all, meaning you delete all the contacts. You can remove the link, meaning that if you delete the account, all the contacts will just suddenly not have a parent customer. They'll just be orphaned, basically. And there's also option to restrict delete, which is actually a pretty nice option to make sure that people clean up data properly, at least make sure that they look at it. So if I try to delete an account that has contacts, it'll actually stop me and say this account has contacts, and so delete has been restricted. That means you would have to go delete all the contacts first before you would be able to delete the account itself. So on the cascading behavior, some of those features does have some names when we look at the solution manager. So some of them are called parental, referential, restrict delete, configurable cascading. So you can select some of those. The parental one is basically everything applies, it cascades everything. Referential means that it doesn't cascade anything, but when you delete it, it just removes the link. Same with referential, restrict delete. Same, doesn't cascade anything, but it restricts deletes. And configurable cascading is however you set the individual items. And there was actually one item left here that I wanted to show you guys. Let me just go a couple of slides back, if you don't mind me. Notice here at the bottom, because this is not in the slide deck, because this is a brand new feature. So I was just noticing that wasn't mentioned in the slides. But notice the roll-up view that's here at the end. That one it lets you define if you want to roll up activities and how you want to roll up activities. So if you, for example, this happens automatically on account from contacts to account, for example. So if you go into an account, you can see all the activities related to this account, including activities that are for the contacts that are in the account. But if you have custom relationships, so if you have a custom relationship under account, for example, like events, and an account have multiple events associated with it, and the activities in those events, that roll-up view would allow you to specify what activities should be rolled up into that view. So when you look at the account, you can see some of the activities that are specific to the event below it. All right, just want to make sure we got that one covered too. All right, so the next slide here, deleting, removing relationships. So the relationships can be deleted if you need to. However, the removal is prevented if it's already published and it's using a lookup field defined in the relationship. So basically means it has dependent components. You cannot delete anything in Dynamics 365 if it has dependent components on it. So you need to use the show dependencies options to see what entities and other components are currently using that relationship. And the lookup field on the child entity also needs to be removed from the form. That's probably one of the most classic items. And the form has to be published without the field. So you can't have any published components anywhere on a relationship or any other component that you want to remove. So it's usually a little bit of detective work when you want to delete components out of the system and if they have a lot of relationship to other items. So we have the many-to-many relationship, and as I mentioned, they have a hidden intersect entity in there. And when you create a many-to-many relationship in Dynamics 365, that hidden intersect table is just auto-magically created in the background. You don't even notice it. You just establish the relationship, and then you can start connecting records. You cannot view it, you cannot customize it. It's basically just there. So you basically have a one-to-many on both ends of the relationship. And actually, if you're looking at the slide, the hidden intersect entity should actually, the two relationships below should be one-to-many and many-to-one, because the contact is only associated there with of the contacts, there's only one contact but can be associated with many of the different hidden and many records on the hidden intersect entity. Sorry, that was apparently difficult to say. What you can do instead is create a manual many-to-many relationship. So you basically create your own custom intersect entity. And one of the benefits of doing that is that you can add additional information to it. So you can add information about when it was created, what the status of it is. You can put in an end date on it. You can apply specific security roles as to who can do it, for example. So you can do a lot of customization and basically get a lot more flexibility for it. You also do get an extra entity in the system that you have to work with. So you have to take that into account, but also makes it a lot easier to do statistics and charts on it when you have that intersect entity. While you can still do that with the many-to-many relationship, the system many-to-many relationship, it gets a little difficult. Well, at least you can't do it without chart on it, for example, without bringing out the chart XML and start making some modifications to the XML and putting it back in. If anyone's interested in more on that, just let me know after the class, and I can give you some links to some blog posts on how to do that if you need to analyze and many-to-many relationships in charts. When you do create the new many-to-many relationship form, you specify basically both entities and the display options in between those relationships. Display option means specifies whether or not it's being shown in the navigation pane for those entities, and you can also give it a specific label, for example. All right, enough talking about relationship. Let's try and have a look. All right, so I'll go back to settings and solutions. And I've zoomed in a bit now, so I hope it's a little easier to read. So I'll go there, custom solution number 1, the one that we created the last time. And I only have a couple of different entities in here. I'll go ahead and select my my custom entity. And I can review the different relationships on there. So you have one-to-many relationship. And these are basically all the system items. I will see the many-to-one relationships, which are basically just the reverse of the one-to-many. And notice here I actually do have some. I created the contact one. That's the referential one. You can basically tell that when type of behavior says system, that means it was created by the system. It's probably just all the owners modified by owning team, all those different items. So this one here, we can actually go work with. So that basically means that we have a lookup field here on the custom entity record to the contact entity. So I can open up the relationship and see the specifics on how that relationship actually works. So we have all the information up here. What's the primary entity? What's the display name? Display name there is the display name of the lookup field that's on the custom entity, looking up to the contact. And of course, this by here, the navigation pane on the primary entity, I can use the plural name. Plural name in this case is custom entities. If I wanted to use a custom label, this is where I would specify. And when on the contact record in the navigation pane, that's then the name that you would see in there and the users would actually click on when they go to this. That's very beneficial if you have used custom entities in general, where you have lots of relationships to the same record. So for example, for activities or work orders or some cases, for example, you can have multiple lookup fields to the account or contacts. So when you have multiple lookup fields to contacts, you can have one that's, say, the contact that created the case. Then you have a contact who is another person who should be informed, and then maybe you have a contact who's like supposed to approve something from that specific customer. So you have 3 different relationships. And so when you create those, come in here to the navigation pane for the primary item and basically identify that relationship in the custom label, because it's basically just going to say, if you look up contacts, if you go on a contact, you're going to have 3 navigation items that all say cases. However, in the scenario I said, one of them should be called cases, cases for approval, cases where approver, cases where informed, and cases that person has created. So you know which relationship to go to, because otherwise you really have no idea. There's no indication to as which relationship you should be, which of the navigation items you should be going to. You can specify which display area in there it will go to. You can modify the display order a little bit, so you have to define that on all the different items. And finally, of course, here we can specify the different items: referential, restricted lead, or the configurable cascading, which is what allowed me to basically make changes by default on all of these different items. I'll say none, remove link, there you go. So we can basically set all of these as needed, and when done, I can just say save and close. Oh, and of course, that label cannot be blank. I'll just leave it at the use the plural name of the entity. Same thing goes if we look at, if we go to competitors here. Let's see if I can find them in this large menu, competitors, and we look at this entity. That's where we have the many-to-many relationship. Right here. As you go through all the system entities, this one's actually usually empty. But on competitors to opportunities and so a few other entities here, basically competitors to product, sales, literature, lead, and opportunity are all system many-to-many relationships. So we have all the details here in the many-to-many relationship, and we can come specify. And you can actually see the relationship entity name, entity competitors there. That's also the name of the Opportunity Competitors Association. Those are relationship names that you can use in order to find the intersect table if you're have to go through the specific data programmatically. All right, just gonna head back to the slide deck. I'll look at some hierarchical data. So hierarchical data are self-referential one-to-many relationships of the same record type. So you can define those in the hierarchical settings by basically setting the hierarchical setting to yes in the solution manager. So on an entity, you can set the hierarchical definition to yes, and you'll see all the information in there and get information about the hierarchy. What that hierarchy basically enables you to do is seeing, for example, different accounts in a hierarchical view with these different cards that you can see down here. So when you go on to Contoso Logistics, for example, which we have here, which is highlighted in blue, then you can see what the parent entity is, Contoso Corporation, and you can see the other accounts that's all associated in the hierarchy around your existing record. So it's very relevant for, when you set up those at the hierarchical relationship, you can specify what field is actually being used for that, and you can also specify what fields that you want to see on this form specifically. And if you actually were using images on on the records and added the entity images to them, like the company logos, for example, they would show up here as well, the same way that users might show up if you have their profile picture, for example. You'll be able to see the details in here too. So, and you can see there in the schema, in the solution manager, that you can enable the account hierarchy, and basically just by enabling the hierarchical relationship there, it'll give you access to the information in there. One catch though is that it's within one entity. So you can't get a hierarchical view of an account with its contacts. It's all accounts related to each other, or contacts related to each other, like a VP, manager, consultants, support people, etc. Have to be related to each other, but it has to be within one entity. A couple of notes in there. Some of these I mentioned. So they can be specified for systems self-referential relationship. There's a few out-of-the-box relationships that cannot be customized, but those are the exception. And you can only have one self-referential relationship per entity set as hierarchical. You can have multiple self-referential relationships, but only one of them can be set as hierarchical. And as I mentioned, it's limited to only one entity. So no combining account and contacts in the same visualization, unfortunately. That would have been nice. All right, so entity mapping. I talked about this earlier when I was talking about the option sets and the local option sets. And it's a feature that definitely helps users when they're creating new records in populating the most generic information automatically. So with the attribute mapping, what it does is that it pre-populates field when you create a new record from that specific entity or that specific record. So if you're on an account and you say you want to create a new contact, it'll automatically populate all the fields from the account that's in the entity mapping from account to contact. You can, of course, override all of this information. It's basically just pre-populating it on create. It's not being enforced. It doesn't have to be exactly that way. Dynamics 365 does allow the mapping of one source attribute to many attributes in the target system. So you can have one field that goes into multiple different places, multiple different fields in the target. So you can use that to basically have a backup or something to see what the account was when the specific record was created, depending on your specific needs. So you could have an address field in an account to be mapped to both the billing address and the shipping address, for example, on an order when you create that, and then you can change one of them as needed if you do need to, just in case you don't have both of them populated. So with entity mapping, there's a couple of limitations. And one is that it only works when a new record is created in the context of the parent record. So keep that in mind, especially when you train your users. So if you go to, if you create a contact and you associate it with an account, if you do it in that order, it's not going to pre-populate anything. If you go to an account and create the contact, it's going to pre-populate all this great stuff for you in advance, and you don't have to fill it out. So your users can really save a lot of time if they just create the records in the correct context. So if you go the other way, it's not going to pre-populate anything. Also, mapping does not apply when an existing record is updated. It's only when it is created. So you can't go back and remap it or do anything afterwards. It's only on create that this actually will work. And of course, it doesn't maintain the relationship after the record is created. It does not keep anything synchronized. So if you create a contact from an account, populates the address, all that information, then and then you remove the parent customer from the contact afterwards, all the data that was already created there is going to stay unless you remove it manually. And this question here, is this a new feature in 365 or already present in earlier versions? This has actually been present in CRM for quite some time. It's one of probably the lesser utilized features because it's kind of hidden away. But I believe it's been a part of the CRM platform, I think as long as I can remember. It was definitely in version 3. Maybe also 1.2, but I don't really remember. All right, with the entity mapping, but you're right, it's not really a feature that's much talked about or blogged about or really comes up about outside of these individual training sessions here. So it's a good thing to get it covered. So there's some restrictions to attributes that can be mapped. They both have to be of the same data type, and the length of the target attribute should be equal or greater than the length of the source attribute. Otherwise, you're going to run into errors when you try to create something and it's trying to populate a field that's not long enough. The target attribute should also not be involved in another mapping, because then they're just going to override each other. That's going to be an issue. And then you cannot map to or from a disabled field. Of course, they all have to be enabled. So there's a question here. So if I update address on account, will that get updated on a contact? No, it's only when you manually create the contact from the account window. If you wanted to do it that way, you basically have to update, create a workflow that updates the contact afterwards. All right, let's look at entity mapping. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to find account here because I've been using that as an example here throughout. So let's go review the account to contact relationship and customize entity. I'll go to one-to-many relationships and find contact. See here. Always like to sort on the related entity. That makes it a little easier than having it be sorted on the schema name. Contact. There we go. And notice here, besides information, that's where I have the mappings. So I'm going to need some more space here. And we can actually see here, there's actually 19 fields that I enabled for mapping. So all of these fields, account ID, of course, to the parent customer ID, but address one city, etc., product price list. Currency, main phone is mapped to business phone. Makes sense. Payment terms, of course, product price list. All of these fields will get automatically populated when creating the site. You can create new ones. You can, of course, also delete the existing ones if you want to. And you can also create a new mapping by coming in here. I'm going to try and make this a little bit bigger. This window can be a little cumbersome to work with. You basically can go through here the list of fields on the account entity, and I can say if I want to map description of the account to description on the contact. I'm really not sure why you want to do that, but we can. So now we have the description on here. So whatever's in the description on the account field is also going to be on the description on the, let's say, save and close. I'm not going to publish it now because we don't want to wait for that, but the description field will now be included. And just to give you an idea of what that actually looks like. So if I open up one of these accounts and go to contact, so the important thing here is that actually I So when I say here, we have an address, street, city, state, province, all those good things. If I go ahead and create a contact from here, then it will pre-populate a lot of this information. I'll say add new contact. And notice here, I now have the account name, of course, that one's all been included, the business phone number, street 1, street 2, zip, postal code, plus all the other fields that's not specifically on this form will be populated automatically. So go ahead and click Save. I have the record on here, and we automatically get all that information. If I just created this record elsewhere, this contact, in any other manner, I would not have gotten any of those pre-populated fields. So definitely worth reviewing the entity mapping. So if you have a lot of records that are being manually created, I definitely recommend you guys having a look at it and optimizing those entity mappings, because it makes the population of data a lot easier. All right, guys, one last thing here before the review and the questions. So connections and connection roles. And connections entering, because you do not need a custom relationship to create these. But what it does is that it can connect any entity or any record to another record of any kind, doesn't matter which type, for a specific role, and that's where the connection roles comes in. So that provides all the descriptions that's been involved in. So like former employer, employer, doctor-patient relationships, golf buddy, whatever kind of connection roles you want to create between different records. And it doesn't have to be of the same entity type. You can basically connect any entity to another entity. So I'm actually just going to give you a little a quick bonus demo here, and share my screen again, because this was not in the script, but I do want to show you the those items in context. So the connections, if I here I'm looking at my contact, I have the connections here under the navigation, and you see all these different items, and we can create a new connection, connect to another, connect to me, I'll say connect to another, and I can basically look up any item here. So you see I can connect myself to accounts, but also any other kind of record. So that could also be appointment, order, devices, etc. I'm just quickly going to select one of these, and then I can specify what role. So I can say I'm an influencer, I'm a former employee, referral, partner, etc. that you can include here. And you can of course come in and specify these roles. I'll go ahead and say save and close, and find my solution manager again, and close up all the entities. And notice down here we have all the connection roles. That's where you can come in and modify the different roles that are available. So you come in, create new ones, change the names. And as you can see here, they're actually available in the solution manager. So that means I can bring them into my custom solution. And I'm just going to quickly do that. Bring them into my custom solution and transfer my custom roles from one environment to another. So notice here I have the connection roles. There we go, and I can say add existing, create new ones. All right, so champion. So now whatever changes I made to this role will carry on to, I'll be able to transfer to another solution or to another organization. All right, that's a question here. So given an example where account and contact has native one-to-many relationship, then why we need to use connection? Is it just to provide role of that contact to an account? So that's a good question. The reason you would want to use that, you can use it to anything basically, so it doesn't have to be contact to account. So where it's commonly used, actually, when you're looking at opportunities and you add stakeholders, for example, and you identify these different stakeholders and opportunity as like either an influencer, super user, decision maker, etc. That's actually the connection roles that are being used for that. So you can now also have contacts that works for multiple different organizations, and you can connect them via the connection roles. But of course, the primary relationship, where you already have that native one-to-many relationship, means that you can only, for employees of that organization. But if you want to establish relationship to other accounts, because the one-to-many relationship, this contact can only belong to one account. The connection roles lets you identify all those loose relationships that contacts can have with other organizations, for example. And is there any out-of-the-box example for viewing hierarchical data? I don't believe it's enabled by default anywhere, so you have to go set that up separately and then look at the hierarchical data. You'll notice as soon as you enable it on the entity, you'll actually be able to see that if on a list on account, all of those accounts are going to have a little hierarchy icon next to them on the view list. So when you click on that little hierarchy icon, it'll actually take you to the to that hierarchical view list. All right, so a review here of the items before we get on to the questions. We looked at calculated fields and how you can use calculations to populate data from other fields. We talked about roll-up fields, how they work. We talked about alternate keys and using those. And we looked at field level security and how that applies and how that meshes with the standard security roles. And on the relationships, we looked at the different types of relationships, specifically one-to-many relationships, how you can define the cascading behavior on it, and what kind of different actions that you can do with the parent based on what happens with the parent record. We also looked at many-to-many relationships, creating a system many relationship versus creating one manually, and the pros and cons of doing those. And finally, here we talked about some about entity mapping and how that helps with data entry when you create new records. Again, records have to be created from that parent record that has the data that you want to copy from. And we'll also talk a little bit about the self-referential relationship, so you can define the hierarchical settings and the visualizations there. And of course, we also talked a little bit about the connection roles and how connections, and specifically connection roles, can become a part of a solution so you can transfer them to a different organization. All right, so let's have some questions. Trying out here for the last two sessions. So question 1, you need to create a solution in Dynamics 365. Which of the following cannot be added to your solution? All right, the correct option there is users. You cannot add a user to a solution. You can add charts, email templates, and entities. All right, question 2. Editable grids are defined at what level? All right, you guys did need to think about that one, the entity level. Oh, that was quick. It's awesome. All right, question 3. Just on editable grids, you can also define them on a subgrid level separately. But between the different options that were available there, and the primarily used one is the entity level. All right, I didn't even get to read this aloud. You just created a custom entity. By default, which security role has read access? All right, by default, system administrator have read access. You guys didn't need to really think about that one either. So let's get on to question 4. You receive a request from the business team to add a field on the opportunity that will pull in the zip code from the related account and combine it with the topic field. Which field type will you use to accomplish this? All right, the correct option there is a calculated field. A simple field wouldn't do any of those things unless you combine it with a workflow. The calculated field can pull information from the opportunity itself as well as the related record, because the record is in a lookup field, can access the information. A roll-up field would only be aggregating data from child records. All right, so question number 5. You create a custom entity. While working on the fields, you find you need a field that will populate with an account or contact. What field type do you use? So the key here is that will populate with an account or contact. So, all right, I see people a little. Most people are saying custom field. Custom field is the correct option. It's the only type of field that will allow you to look up an account or a contact, but it will only allow you to look up those two. Technically, you could argue that it's also a lookup field, but a lookup field can only look up to one entity. The customer field is technically also a kind of a lookup field, but it can only look up customer or account. All right, question number 6. You're working with your ERP team. They inform you that the data that they're sending for an integration will not have a unique identifier. What can you do in Dynamics 365 to create one? All right. Create an alternate key is the correct option. And it's called an alternate key. I see here there's a typo that says create an alternative key. It is called an alternate key. Oh, potato, potato. You are needing to update the status reasons on the accounts. Which of the following statements are true when working with status reasons? All right, looks like most people got that. So there's a couple items here. So it's saying a status reason can be associated with multiple states. That is incorrect. It has to be associated with one state. You cannot change the labels. That's also incorrect because you definitely can change the label. So the correct option there is C. You can add more options because you can essentially add additional status reasons, and you can change the label of the already existing status reasons. However, it's the status by itself, not the status reason, that you cannot change. All right, question number 8. You guys are doing great. You want to prevent opportunities from being deleted if there are open associated quotes on the opportunity. Which do you use while setting the cascading behavior? Oh, everybody went for delete, restrict, delete. This is awesome. All right, so let's do question 9. You have a business request that when a user creates an opportunity from an account, the opportunity will have all address field from the account into the custom address field on the opportunity. What is the best way to do this? All right, again, entity mapping. That's great. So entity mapping A there is the correct answer. So we'll go ahead with question 10. Which is not true when working with connections? That's a question. Which one is not true? So it's one of those questions, and definitely be careful on these on the exam. But sometimes they're in reverse a little bit, which can make them confusing. So the correct option there is the C cannot be used for querying and reporting. So since it's reverse, it is which is not true, meaning, and you cannot use them. You can use them for the reversal. So I even got confused on that one. I needed to go check the actual key to see what they were thinking with that question. All right, guys, that was the last question of the day. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you guys staying on, and looking forward to talking to you all next week when we have the last 2 sessions. We'll be on customizing forms and business rules, and views and visualizations, as well as some Dynamics 365 and Office 365 integrations. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. And the answers should be available to download on the meeting room. All right, everybody have a good day.